Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Office 365 Dev Pulse show. My name is Scott Hillier, and I'm your host. We're sponsored today, as always, by Microsoft. So before we get started with anything else, we want to make sure that we thank them for their sponsorship. We're here because of that. So great sponsor. Thank you very much, Microsoft. A couple of announcements today before we get on to the technical details at hand. A few things have come out since our last show that are worth noting. I think the audience will definitely be interested in. First one is Visual Studio 2015 Update 1 is available now. A couple of things I'm really excited about with that. Of course, ASP.NET 5, but also client-side development takes a big step forward with this version of Visual Studio. We've got support for TypeScript and non-Microsoft approaches that use things like Bower and Gulp and the Node package manager. So make sure you get that latest update. It has improvements to tooling across the board there. We've provided the links to get that update in the handout section of today's webinar. Also, Angular 2 beta is out now. So if you've been waiting for Angular 2, as I have for a long time, and maybe just kind of on the edges of it, watching it develop, still doing your Angular 1 work, Angular 2 beta is out now, and the Angular folks say it is appropriate for everybody to start developing in Angular 2. They believe they're at a point where it makes sense for us to do that. So I'm pretty excited. I've already gotten started with that. In fact, make sure you get that release candidate 1 of Visual Studio before you start that work with Angular 2. It'll be a big help. Third big announcement since we last were together is the announcement of what are called Power Apps. Microsoft announced Power Apps, and what Power Apps are a way for business users, power users, pro developers across the entire spectrum to quickly create apps that are mobile ready and work in the cloud environment. So check that out as well. Again, in the handout section are all the links for these announcements as well as links for the other things that we'll be talking about today. Okay, our show today, though, is dedicated to StratusForms. StratusForms is a tool that's going to allow us to build forms inside of SharePoint and to do that without having to worry about InfoPath. So if you're concerned about InfoPath, your reliance on InfoPath, this is going to be a great episode for you. And in order to get started with that, I want to go ahead and welcome Mark Rackley. Mark, why don't you join us? There he is. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good, Scott. How are you doing?
Good, good. So Mark is a partner and chief technology officer at the Pate Group. Mark's also a guy that speaks at a lot of conferences. Probably a lot of folks watching today know of Mark. He's also the guy who puts together the SharePoint Lusa conference, which is a pretty popular one out there as well. But also big into the product here, StratusForms. So we've got Mark with us today to talk about StratusForms. Before we get rolling, Mark, tell us one non-technical thing about yourself that we don't know. That's always the hardest question.
I know, right? One non-technical thing, and that you don't know. I'm not wearing pants. How's that? I'm wearing my pajamas still.
You know, no one's ever wearing pants. That's a secret. Actually, your profile says you like bacon. How's that? I'll throw one to you.
Yeah, but that's not a secret. Like, I think anybody who knows me knows I like bacon. So, yeah, I'm a little bit of a bacon fan. So if you want to get on my good side, you can send me some bacon.
All right, great. So tell us a little bit about what we're going to do today. Talk to us about StratusForms, why the audience should be interested.
Okay. Well, first of all, whenever you see me turn my head to the left, it's because I'm looking at Scott. He's on my other monitor here.
You're underneath me, so if I look down.
All right. Well, so let's go ahead and jump into the slide deck a little bit then, so I'll take you through some bullet points. You already mentioned me and the things I do, so I'll skip past this slide. So StratusForms was a tool that came into existence because I had a client at one point that wanted or actually they had to get off Lotus Notes, and that means they had to get all their payroll forms that they were doing in Lotus Notes into SharePoint, but they hated InfoPath, and luckily I hate InfoPath too. That's not a secret. That's a technical non-secret that I'm just not a fan of InfoPath. And so I started thinking about ways that we could help them achieve their goals while not using InfoPath, and kind of the impetus for StratusForms was born, and I was able to take some of the lessons I learned on that project and create StratusForms. And what StratusForms is it's a jQuery library, so it's 100% client-side based. You don't have to install anything on your servers or anything, and it allows you to create business forms using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So anything you can do with those, with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, you can do in StratusForms. So you can create, really powerful forms that call web services, that are wizard forms, that are very highly stylized. You can make them responsive if you want to. So it's really, the limits of your forms are really the limits of your HTML and JavaScript skills. And and we have the engine, and the core piece of StratusForms is 100% free. So as long as you're not bundling StratusForms into some product and selling that product, it's free to use. So some things about it. It works in SharePoint 2007, 2010, 2013. It works in 2016 and in Office 365. The reason it is so cross SharePoint compatible is because we have a data library that allows you to plug in different data libraries for different technologies. The free version uses a data library that uses Mark Anderson's SP Services library. And so it's using SharePoint's ASMX Web Services to do the CRUD operations with SharePoint, which gives you that across-the-board support for SharePoint. We do have some other libraries in development. We've got a JSON library so that it specifically uses SharePoint's JSON library. And we also have the potential to do things like, create a library for WordPress or create a library for Salesforce, right? So it really opens us up to making this a cross-platform form solution as well. And why I call it an alternative to InfoPath, because like InfoPath, when you create a form, it stores that form in an XML object, right? So you can have a form with 200 fields, you store it in an XML file, and then you promote like 2 or 3 of those fields to your SharePoint list. You can do the same thing with StratusForms, except it stores all of your form data in a JSON object, and that JSON object is a field in your SharePoint list. And then you can promote the fields you want out of that JSON object into your SharePoint list, just like you do with InfoPath. So that's what makes this form solution really different from all the other form solutions out there where you're just creating forms on a SharePoint list. So it gives you a little more functionality there. There's a lot of different.
You don't necessarily have to have a column in a SharePoint list for every field in the form.
Exactly. In fact, I rarely have a column for every field on my forms when I use StratusForms. I usually pick out those fields that I want to create list views on that I need to export, and the rest I leave in that JSON object so that I can expand and grow the form as I want to without affecting list views and creating 200 columns on a list if you happen to have 200 fields in your form.
Sure.
There's also support for a lot of different field types, including things like people pickers. So you get a lot of the functionality you need in it as well. You can do repeating content like you can in InfoPath. You can do parent-child list relationships automatically. We're going to demo that in one of the demos. There's some built-in reporting functionality. So if you have 1,000 forms in there and you want to report on the data in the forms that maybe you didn't promote to SharePoint, you can do some reporting on that data as well using a library called data tables. And something else I've added is the ability to encrypt fields in a form or even an entire form. So let's say you have a social security number field and you didn't want anybody else to see that field except specific people. You can encrypt it so that you have to have a key in order to read that entry. So there's some little things in there like that. So we do have some services available around StratusForms. Like I said, StratusForms itself, it's been in some sort of existence for a few years now, and rebranding to StratusForms and breaking out into some different functionality and putting it on the IT Unity channel, it's kind of opened us up to more support around that and some community support. But we do offer paid support as well, and we offer things for customizations. If there's a specific piece of functionality you want in there, or if you need training, we can help you with that. So you can contact us at StratusForms@pategroup.com for more information if you're interested in kind of that hands-on training and help and support with that. So just throw it out there. We also have a premium version of StratusForms that is in development right now, and this will be a app in the SharePoint store. And what this is going to do is it's going to, as we go through and create some forms, you're going to see me doing a lot of things manually. I'm going to be creating a special field on a list. I'll be copying and creating some JavaScript. Well, this application is going to automate all of that for you. So it's just a couple of clicks of buttons and it does it for you. It's also going to give you a nice drag and drop form designer so that you can start to get some of the non-technical people creating some simple forms. And it's going to, and this one will also use that JSON library I was talking about. But what's nice about it is the premium tool and the free tool use the exact same engine. So if you create a form with the free tool, it'll work with the premium tool. And if you create a form with the premium tool, it'll work with the free tool. So because that engine's the same, they'll work across the board. So I'm going to jump into a little bit of script here just so you guys can get an idea of what exactly is going on. Like, so if you want to stop me and ask any questions, Scott, feel free.
Sure.
But since this is all client-side dev, part of the process of building your scripts is you're going to have to include the script references that you need. StratusForms does use jQuery. It also uses SP services for that free version. And then we have the StratusForms libraries that you're going to need as well. And I use jQuery UI for things like the date pickers and some of that functionality. So these are the common libraries that you may include when you're building a script for StratusForms.
And so these are all available, I see, from CDNs. You've got your StratusForms up there on a CDN.
Yeah, everything. I put my StratusForms on a CDN. Everything is available through some sort of CDN. So you technically don't have to download any of these scripts locally if you don't want to. Kind of the secret to StratusForms is that whenever you want to create a form on a list or a library, you have to have a special field that contains that JSON object, and that is just a plain text multi-line field called StratusForms data, and that is the only configuration step you really have to take to get started using a tool. And once you have that in place, in order to create your first form and have data in it, you just need to call an initialization function where you pass in the name of your form or the name of the string, the name of the list your form is stored in, and then whatever the name of the query string variable is that would contain the ID for your form, so that we can go and load that form for you. And the same thing for submissions. If you want to save it, there is a submission function you need to call, where you again pass in the name of the list you're saving it to, and then there's a complete function. So if you want to do some processing after the save event has occurred, you can put some functionality in there to do something else, to go to a different page, to save something else, or just, again, it's JavaScript, so to do whatever you want to do. Again, some of the nitpicky details that you need to do is for all of your elements, it's important that every single one of them have a unique ID. Since we're creating a JSON object for all of that form data, they have to have a unique ID, and if you have two elements with the same ID, it's going to cause one of those fields to not work. If you want to make a field required, it's as easy as adding the class of required to your element. And if you want to promote a field to a SharePoint list, you specify an attribute called list field name, and from there you specify what is the internal field name of the list field that you want to promote it to. And by putting that attribute in there, whatever value you store in that field gets promoted to the SharePoint list. Some custom field validation. We do some custom validations for numbers, email, phone numbers, social security numbers, and you can create your own field validations as well by creating a function that returns a true or false for a field type. So if you want to do some weird custom field type and you want to have custom field validation, you can extend that pretty easily as well. We do have a free form builder tool. This is a very basic tool that can help you get started creating your first forms, because it will include a lot of those scripts and stuff you need for you. And it also makes a really good online documentation if you want to know how to create a specific field in StratusForms. So it works well for that too. And there's the link for that. And we'll be using that here in a second. So I just want to jump in and let's go ahead and create our very first form using StratusForms and using that form builder tool. So here on the StratusForms site, let me know if the delay is too long and you're not seeing what I'm seeing. But
no,
I'm over here. I'm over here at the StratusForms site, and we have a link here for our form builder tool. And obviously, I'm not a designer, but in this quick tool, it's just to help you get started creating your form. And the first thing it asks you for is what's the name of the list that you want to create the form for, and then it tells you that you're going to need that plain multi-line text field with called StratusForms data. So I'm going to go over to my Office 365 site here, and I'm going to go through the entire process. I'm going to create a new list, if SharePoint will cooperate with me. So I'm going to create a list, and I'll call it IT Unity. And then I'm going to go into the settings for this list, and I'm going to create that special field that we need. And again, with the app that we're coming out with, it does all this stuff for you automatically, but for now you need to do it manually. So I'm going to create a column. I'm going to call it StratusForms data, multiple lines of text, and it is going to be plain text. It does need to be plain text or it won't work correctly. So we now have our list created and configured, and we can actually start creating forms for this list. So I'm coming back to our form creator here, and I could say my list name was IT Unity. It has the field that I need, and now we can go through and pick what kind of fields do we want to create. Do I want to create a single line of text field? I'll give the field name. I'll make it a required field. Then this is asking if you want to promote it to a field in your SharePoint list, what's the internal field name for that field? So I'm actually going to promote this to the title field. So let's create another field here. How about we'll just do a choices field. Actually, I want to show you that you can also look up fields from other lists in your SharePoint site. If we look at our SharePoint site over here, we have a list here called projects, and within that projects there's just 3 entries in that projects list. So I want to create a field called project that is a drop-down list with choices from a SharePoint list. So now it's asking me what is the source list for your drop-down list, and that was the projects list, and which field in that list do you want to appear in the drop-down list, and that's going to be the title field. And then what do you want the first select option to be for the unselected, so I'll just have select one. So let's just say I want to create these 2 fields, so I can say I'm done creating fields. And it's going to take you to a page that shows you your very plain basic form, but it's also got a couple of tabs for the HTML generated for this form and the script that's needed for this form to work. So you can see it adds the script references for us. It's got the initialization function in here, and it's already pointing to the list IT unit that we created. The same thing for the submit form. And here is the piece of code we need to actually do the drop-down list functionality to read from a list in the site to populate the drop-down list. And again, here, this is just HTML with some attributes. So this one was going to have that list field name because we're promoting it to that title field. You can actually take this HTML and you can throw it into any HTML editor and make it look really nice and pretty, but for now it's just a plain form. So if we now want to create a form in SharePoint for this, I can come back into my SharePoint site, and what I've got is I've got my site assets library opened up here in SharePoint Designer so I can quickly add files. So I'm going to add a JavaScript file here, and I will call it itunity.js. I'm going to edit this file, and then I'm going to come back to the script here, and I'm just going to copy and paste that script, paste it in this file, and I'm going to copy and paste the HTML. Now the HTML and JavaScript can exist in different files if you want, but for simplicity I'm just going to put them here in the same file. So there's all our JavaScript and all our HTML. I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to come back into our SharePoint site, and I'm going to create a page to put this form on. So I'm going to go to our site contents. I'm going to go into site pages, and I'm going to create a web part page. And on this web part page, I'll also call it IT Unity, put it in our site pages library, and we'll create that. So on this web part page, I'm going to add a content editor web part under media content editor, and I'm going to link it to our script that we uploaded in our site assets library. and that was in site assets, and it was called itunity.js. So here's our simple little form. I'm also going to add one more web part to this page. I'm going to actually add the list that we have, our itunity list that we created, so we can see what that does. So our list is right here.
So you got some basic styling from SharePoint right away.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to by default, it's going to use the basic styling from SharePoint, whatever you have as your default stuff for SharePoint. I didn't override anything for those in the HTML. So yeah, so this is your first form. If you try to save an entry without putting any information in there, it tells you this is a required field, and it tells you that there's errors you need to fix. So I'm going to put in my name here in this field. There's that list of projects that came from the projects list, and now I can submit the entry. It tells me the save was successful. This is what that complete function is doing that I told it to do, is to just pop up an alert. And the page reloads, and it's actually loading the item that we created. If we look here in our list, you can see it promoted the name field to the title field, and then all of the rest of the form fields is in the StratusForms data field in the list right here. So we can update it by simply selecting another option, and you can see it updating the list. If we want to create a new entry, we just have to get rid of the query string variable. And we can put in Steve worked on project A. So that's all there is to it. That's one of your most basic StratusForms forms that you can create.
Yeah, that looks great. So talk to me a little bit about a couple of things here. How, if you're mapping to the internal fields in SharePoint, what's the approach that you recommend people take for figuring out what the internal names are?
So there's a couple of ways. The most easy, straightforward way is to just, when I really have no idea, I'll use the REST query for that list, and I'll look at those results that are displayed on the screen, because that will very clearly show you what the internal field name is. Even if you've got spaces in your field names, it'll actually show you that, so you can quickly get to that. The other way I've been doing since SharePoint 2007 is just to go into, you may even have a better way, I'm a creature of habit, but if I come into the list settings for a list and click on the list, I can actually look at in the URL up here to figure out what the internal field name, and that will be the internal field name there. However, if there's spaces in the field, that works a little bit differently. As you probably know, whenever you're actually working with fields, you have to put in the underscore percent or whatever, 0x200, the thing that always bites me. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. The nice thing about that trick right there is you can just do it in the browser. So if you're a power user and your idea is to stay in the browser, that helps you with that.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to mind is what happens if you want to have multiple forms on a single page? Is that something that you recommend?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I first created this, I had 9 forms for one list, and again, it comes down to JavaScript at that point. So how do you want to handle it? You could have it to where when the page loads, you look at one of the fields in the list to determine what's the content type, or what is the determining factor, which form to show, and then redirect the user to that specific form. Or you could create one form that is a combination of all your forms that just shows and hides the specific form you want to use. So you have a couple options there.
If you have multiple forms created the way we just walked through, one of the challenges could just be managing your JavaScript references. If each one of those is pointing to the CDN, you wouldn't want to necessarily download that thing 9 different times.
Right.
So you maybe at some point have some level of centralized management for them. So.
Yeah, and I'm actually working with somebody else in the community about one of their apps that they have to help actually maintain that exact thing. So, yeah, so keep an eye for that.
Some other time we'll have to show you the CDN manager, which we've had on this show for doing exactly.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm working with Doug Ware, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think he was in on that one. Maybe he's got a different one that
Okay.
he's using. But anyway, that's definitely one of the challenges when you're doing a lot of client-side stuff in SharePoint.
Absolutely.
Looks great though.
Thank you. So let's jump into a little more functionality here. I want to start with, I'll just take it, how are we doing on time here? Make sure we don't eat up too much time. I do have, like I said, that was kind of a plain form, a very vanilla form. When you download the source code for StratusForms from IT Unity, it comes with a couple of sample forms, and one of those is a timesheet form. And that timesheet form actually has the CSS, the HTML, and the JavaScript broken out into 3 different files, right? So that kind of shows you how you can start breaking out those files. And it's actually a much more stylized form as well. So if we jump in here to our site and we go, I don't know what is up with Office 365 today. We have a list here called timesheet. And if we look at the list settings for timesheet, you can see it's got a couple more fields. It's got an employee field, which is a person field, and it's got a week field, which is a date field. So this is maybe where you could put some timesheet data. And if we open up our form for that in SharePoint Designer here, and I'll also open up that JavaScript file so we can look at that. We can see some of the other functionality that gets used. So within the HTML, I'm going to use the people picker functionality of SharePoint. And to do that, I've got to include some references to the different libraries needed, the different client object model libraries that you need for the people picker. And to do that, I have a div here that contains that people picker. You can see it has an ID of employee, and it's got that list field name value equal to employee. So it's going to create a people picker, and it's going to promote the value of the people picker to that person field in your SharePoint list. I also have another input here that is going to be promoted to the week field in my list, and it is of type date. So he said it is a date field, and it has a validation function called validate to make sure that you check for a date validation. If we look at the JavaScript for this form, we can see that we are using the jQuery date picker to attach the calendar to that date field, and then we have our same functions we had before to load the projects list, to initialize the form, and to submit the form. So if we go into our site here, we go into site pages, and we look at Stratus. This is that form implemented in SharePoint. So you can see it's a much more stylized form. It's not so plain and blocky. You do get our people picker functionality here, so I can type in my name, and it works just like people picker. I can get the jQuery UI calendar, so I can select a date, and I can create an entry. It tells me the entry is successful, and then we can see that data get added in that form object there. So that's adding a little more style, a little more functionality, and I'm actually going to add even more functionality to that there. So here we have some updated script, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same form, but now I'm going to add a table to it, and that table is going to have a drop-down list where you can select a project, and then it's going to have an hours input for each one of the days of the week. So it's just an input class that you can specify the days of the week, and then I'm going to call this little function that sums up those hours for the days of the week. All the rest of the script is the same here, so I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it over my page here, save it, and now when I reload the page, we get this information for selecting a project. And you can notice it still loaded the information for the saved form with the ID of 21. So by changing the field form and adding fields to it, it doesn't break old forms. It'll still populate in your updated forms, which is kind of nice too. So now I can, again, select a project, put hours in for that project. I've got some JavaScript that updates those totals. save it. It tells me the save was successful, and it updates that JSON object to now show those hours for Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it just shows us adding some more functionality. But the next piece I want to do is show you how you can actually do repeating content, because one of the things you might want to do is be able to log multiple projects you worked in a week. So using the repeating content functionality, you can achieve that. So to do that, what you do is you specify in your form what is your container that contains all of your repeating content. So in this example, we have a table row that contains all of the fields that we want to repeat. So we give this table row a unique ID, and then we have this attribute called data-StratusForms repeatable. And you set that value to Y. And then StratusForms knows that whatever this thing is, whatever this element is, a table row, it could be a div, whatever contains repeating content, this tells StratusForms that this is a repeating content container. You then need to create some sort of button or link or something that causes the user to be able to add a row. So you can specify where on the form you want to do that. How do you want to trigger an add row? So here I just have a link that calls the method StratusForms repeat, and it's telling it which container are you repeating. This allows you to have multiple repeating containers on your forms if you want as well, because you're telling it which one you want to repeat. And it's just going to have the text of add row. So that's the difference from our previous script. Paste that in there. Refresh the page again. Let's go ahead and create a new item this time. So now you see that we have this add row link, and when we click on the add row link, it actually adds more rows for us. So we can work on. So yeah, so now we can just add different hours for different projects. We also, there's this little minus button here. If you click on that, it'll actually delete a row. So you can actually delete rows and add rows. So I can again.
And that's just ultimately reflected in the JSON object that gets saved.
Exactly. Yeah, so whenever I save it, let's select a week here. When I save the entry now, see it loads the form back up, and then all that data is reflected in the object. And you can also see it is promoting that employee field and that week ending field to my list as well, because I specified that in the HTML. So some other features that you can do, you have the ability to actually promote, let's say you have, so on our form here, we have this total field, which is just a span. It's not an input field, but you can actually promote spans and labels into SharePoint list fields as well. So if you've got some business functionality, and now I want to promote that 17 to the hours field in my list, it works the same way as other inputs. So I can actually come in here and just say that I want this span that has my total. I can just specify list field name equals hours. Save that, and now when I update the entry, oops, I got to reload the page first. Reload the page here. Update that entry, and you can see it actually promoted the value of that span to a SharePoint list field as well. So it doesn't just have to be form fields. It can be spans and other content areas to promote.
Nice.
Thank you. Another feature, this is actually brand new to version 1.1 that's coming out hopefully in the next week or so, is you can actually choose if you want to promote that repeating content to a child list. So it doesn't have to, if you want to do extra reporting on that child content, you can actually promote it to another list. So what I've done in this, to the HTML here, is in that repeating row that I have, in addition to the attribute of data-StratusForms repeatable, I have an attribute called data-StratusForms child list. And this is where you specify the name of the list in SharePoint that you want to to populate the child data to. So there, I have a list called time in my SharePoint site, and I specified which fields I want to promote to it by using the same attribute list field name. So I'm going to promote the project field and the day fields of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So I'm going to take those fields, I'm going to promote them to a child list in SharePoint. The rest of the functionality is the same. It's just adding those two attributes there. And I've never demoed this before, so if it breaks, I'll just blame you, Scott. How's that?
That's what I'm here for.
So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to edit this page real quick so that we can add that time entry list onto it. So I'm going to add my time list. And this time list has a lookup field back to the parent item. So it's doing an automatic little parent-child list relationship for you there. So if I reload the page with Form 22, and I save it again, it takes a little bit longer sometimes because it's actually saving more items. And you can see it actually created those 3 entries into that time list. So for that time entry for those projects, there's those hours. So now I could create a list view to see how many hours were worked on a project fairly easily.
That looks great, yeah.
Thank you. It's all about trying to keep it easy so you don't have to know how to do too much. So some other functionality that we have, one of them that I'm actually pretty excited about because it seems fairly unique to me, I don't think others are doing, is field encryption. So what you can do is you can use any encryption, decryption library out there that you want. For my example, I use something called Crypto.js. And what you do is you find your cryptography library you want to use, and then StratusForms has an encrypt and decrypt function that you override with whatever this library's functions are. So you can use any library you want. We don't store the key that's used for encryption and decryption, so it's very secure. But if you lose the key, you lose your data, so you got to keep that somewhere. So the way it works is you add the references for your security scripts, and again, this time I'm using something called Crypto.js, and then you override the decrypt function with your library's decrypt function, and you override the encrypt function the same way. So I'm going to do a demo of this so we can see that in action. So I'm going to take these script references, I'm going to add them to our library here. And then I'm going to take those override functions and I'll add them as well. And that will actually need to be in our JS file here. We'll save that. Now the only downside to using different files for your style, your JavaScript, and your HTML is you sometimes have to take into account what's called cache busting. And so just to make sure that I don't have a problem with a cached version, I'm going to append a query string to my JavaScript file here. So I get that question a lot. What happens when scripts get stuck? You can use this thing called cache busting to just append any query string variable to a script to unstick it. A little preventative measure there.
Right.
So if I want to encrypt a field, let's say I want to add another field to this list called the social security number. So I'm just going to copy my week ending field and I'm going to call it SSN, and I'm not going to promote it to a SharePoint list field. I'm going to give it an ID of SSN. I won't give it a placeholder. Now what makes this an encrypted field is if you give it a class of SF encrypt. And StratusForms knows if it sees that class that this is an encrypted field. So if I didn't screw up anything here, I can save this form, load it again in SharePoint. We see we now have an SSN field, which I put SSM because I'm a moron that way. So we'll put in the social security number.
Are we now getting your social security number?
Yes, that is my social security number. You can use that to go buy a new boat.
I'm ready.
All right.
Here's your credit.
So when you go to submit it, it detects that this is an encrypted field, and it's asking you what key do you want to use to encrypt this field. So I'm going to put in a key of test. So it saves it. The page loads, and it again detects that there's an encrypted field and it's saying what is the key to this field. So if I put in the wrong key, it tells me, whoops, your encryption failed. You're going to have to reload and try again. And if we look at that field in the StratusForms library, you can see it's an encrypted field that you cannot make sense of. So without that key, it won't decrypt. So I can reload it again. When it prompts me, I can put in that key, and it decrypts the field for us, so we can see what the field is.
Yeah. Now, if you don't have the key, what does it present to you? So let's say you ask me for it, and I'm a person that doesn't have the key.
Yeah. So it just showed garbage in the field because it shows actually the encrypted value, and then it also makes the field read only, so you can't do anything with it.
Okay. So that's what people who aren't supposed to see it would see.
Right. They would just see this, or you could write some JavaScript that would turn that into asterisks or whatever. Again, whatever you want to do. You know, it's kind of up to you. You're going to know the decryption failed in your script, so you can do something else if you want to that field. You can actually encrypt the entire form too, and that is this. All you have to do for that is to take that class of sfEncrypt and apply it to your entire div that contains your form. So if I move this class to the entire form, come back in here. Let's go ahead and create a new form. So I put in my name again, week ending, and I save it. It says, well, it's encrypted, so I'll put in my key. And when it reloads, it's going to ask me for the key again. I'll go ahead and put in the correct key this time, just so you don't have to see it. So it does load the form properly, but if we look at the data, the entire JSON object is encrypted. So all of it's encrypted and you can't see it. So you can't encrypt the entire form or just specific fields in the form. I've actually got an idea in mind to make it to where you actually don't have to know the key. You'll actually do it by whatever group you belong to. So if your group,
I think that would be the obvious request is people saying, I don't really want to hand the key to everybody, so how can I just make sure admins do this?
Yeah, and what I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a list that's going to hold your key, and give item level permissions to that list. So whenever StratusForms goes to get and you're going to specify in StratusForms what list contains your key. So when you go to load the form, it's going to read the key from the list. And if you don't have access to that list item, you don't get access to the key. So you can't go browse to it and view it, and you can't decrypt the form either. And that's going to automate that a little bit.
Right. So you just allow the people you want to have item level access to that key.
Exactly.
Yep, that would work.
If you got a better idea, I'm all ears.
No, it sounds like it worked just fine. I think the only key thing here, which of course Office 365 takes care of for you, is you really want all this in SSL now if you're going to be passing that key around. So it's really just the on-premises version where people might have to think about whether they're vulnerable to that thing being picked up through man in the middle.
Right. Exactly. Another thing that we can do, actually this is my last demo I was going to show today, is you can do reporting on data, and that is using the data tables library, which is actually one of my favorite libraries in SharePoint. What this will do, so the data tables library will basically create the list view type functionality, and it takes as parameters to the library an array of JSON objects. And since StratusForm creates JSON objects, we can make a REST query to your list in StratusForms, get those JSON objects out, and then pass them to this reporting function I created, where you specify which fields from your JSON object do you actually want to report on. So in this example, I have a list name called messages, and I want to report on the fields name, email, and age. So if we go into my site over here in Office 365, I don't know why site contents is breaking on me today. I have a list here called messages, and you can see it's got some StratusForms entries in it for name, email, and age. And if I go to a page I have here, . I have one called test, which actually has our a simple little form for the name, email, and age. And if I want to do reporting on this list, I can actually open up our page in SharePoint. Again, we'll just do it here from SharePoint Designer. And I can add the reference to data tables. And here it's using CDN again to get those references. And then I need to call the reporting method. And then I just need to create a table, an HTML table that's going to hold that report. And it's going to have the ID of reporting table. So using that piece of script there, I can now reload the page. And you can see it turn that data into a report here that we can view with this data tables library.
Yeah, that looks great.
So you can actually sort on the column names. You get search because of this. If you just want to see people who are 25 years old. So there's some nice functionality that you get out of data tables to allow some list view type functionality.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. I like that a lot. And in fact, just using things like the SharePoint REST API, you can get to all that data and really do whatever you want with it.
Exactly. Yeah, as long as you can get it into an array of JSON objects and pass this library. I've got a few sessions I do on the data tables library using things with data tables and REST. So.
Yeah, I think that looks great.
Well, thank you. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to show. Anybody have any questions in the audience, or?
Oh, we can do a quick check. I don't think we've got anything in the queue sitting here. Let me just give a quick check. Yeah, I don't see anything in the queue, and I asked the ones that I had though. So what do you got for us to wrap up? What do you want us to remember?
So we do have a channel on IT Unity for you guys to go and download the source code. And that source code comes with some example forms, just like the timesheet form that I showed you. There's a discussion board that you can use to ask questions and get your questions answered. And there's a form builder tool. So all the pieces are there to go ahead and get started and playing with it. And as soon as we get that app in the App Store, I'll be introducing that as well. So yeah, get in there, have fun, and if you have any questions, let me know. And same with InfoPath.
Okay, well, thanks for spending time with us, Mark, and going over the tool. I think you've got something here that's going to be very useful to a lot of folks. It's not like InfoPath is going away tomorrow, but people are certainly concerned about its status and our reliance on it and what do we do going forward. And not to mention, the HTML, CSS, this is all the way everything is done now. So there's no reason to do something in a proprietary fashion that, that we can do in a much more standard way.
Exactly, and that's another good thing about this is even if you don't know what your next form solution is going to be, with StratusForms, your forms are HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Your data is stored as JSON that you can get to with REST, right? We're not holding anything captive or proprietary. It's all using standards out there to do what you want to with it.
Yep, that makes an awful lot of sense. Okay, great. Well, again, thanks for spending the hour with us going over all that. Again, for the folks that are watching, in the handout section, we have links to all the important resources that Mark pointed out, as well as the announcements we made at the beginning of the show. We like to thank Microsoft again for being our sponsor before we check out. And look on IT Unity for our next show. We don't have it quite scheduled yet, but we're going to keep them going. So check us out on IT Unity and make sure to follow IT Unity on Twitter so you get all the updates. And with that, I think we're done. Again, thanks, Mark. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate the time.